There we are. Fantastic. Well, good evening, everyone. For those who have joined us previously with the Online Wine Tasting Club, it is wonderful to see you again. For those of you who are new to us, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much to Vineyard Cellars for putting this tasting together with all the independent merchants around the country. So this evening, I am joined by Steve Peck, who is the Director of Winemaking at J Lohr over in California. And we are just going to have a chat with him this evening about some absolutely fantastic wines. We've got 6 great wines to try from Arroyo Seco and Paso Robles, which I feel for a lot of people in the UK, they're regions that we don't always talk about and we don't always see in California. Napa gets, the plaudits. We see a lot from Sonoma. We see a lot of those kind of things. But we've got some great wines and some great styles. I really think across the board here, something for everyone. Some really, really good stories. And we'll go from there. So good evening, Steve. Lovely to have you on. And if you just want to give us a little overview of who you are, what you do, and what J Lohr's all about, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate you having me on. I don't know if there's any Wales fans in the audience. My heart goes out to you. So yeah, I've been with J Lohr now for over 15 years. Just to give you an introduction, our founder, J Lohr, is in the next building here. I'm at our Paso Robles winery today. Our first vineyards were planted in 1972 on the Central Coast, and our winery was bonded in 1974. So we're quickly approaching our 50th year celebration. J Lohr is been referred to as sort of the Robert Mondavi of the Central Coast, and it'll be my hope today to kind of not only introduce and share these terrific wines from our local growing region, but also to maybe educate you on kind of the aspects and the culture of these growing regions. So the first wine in our glass, Jamie, should I jump up with that, or
yeah, so
maybe
why don't we talk just a little bit about the first wine, just so people know what they're having a sip of, and then we can jump into that video so people can get a real feel of what the vineyards look like in the areas we're going to be talking about today.
Right. So, in Champagne, there's this model called grower producer, right? Where they're families that, grow the grapes and take the product all the way through to the customer. And, J Lohr really does, define itself as a wine growing organization. We have over 1,000 acres. So is that, 400 hectares of grapes planted in Monterey County, which is a very cool climate area. Our vineyards are located in the Arroyo Seco sub-appellation. And then further south in a warmer area called Paso Robles, we'll taste the last 2 wines in our flight today. The Syrah and Cabernet Sauvignon are from that warmer region, where we have just under 3,000 acres. So whatever that is, 1,200 hectares or something to that effect. So we really do begin from planting, farming, harvesting, a true wine business. And with, if you remember, there's that arcane language on the back of every bottle that says produced and bottled at J Lohr, Paso Robles, California. So that really is the sort of stamp of legitimacy that it's not a negociant wine coming from us. Our house style for Sauvignon Blanc is based on the clone that's kind of taken the lead in the Arroyo Seco. It's a Musqué clone of Sauvignon Blanc. This is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. But it will have a little bit more floral character than maybe the standard clones of Bordeaux or Sauvignon Blancs, where Semillon is maybe typically included in the blend. We practice kind of, I guess, what we'd call the New World winemaking style, preventing oxidation. and trying to capture some of those thiolic characters, so that that passion fruit, key lime pie. One unique attribute of this wine is that while you wouldn't necessarily consider, I guess there's a few producers that would use oak barrels. We actually use acacia puncheons and acacia barrels in the aging of this wine. And acacia is more of a neutral wood that brings weight and body while still retaining the freshness in the absence of those kind of toasty, roasty, toasty oak aromas. That's one sort of value add that we have on this Sauvignon Blanc.
I think what's interesting about Sauvignon Blanc, Steve, is it's one of the grapes that can be so vastly different wherever you plant it in the world. Wherever you put Sauvignon Blanc down, it makes its own thing. It takes its own route. And, you compare Sancerre to Marlborough to this. They're so vastly different. Whereas a lot of other grapes, it's kind of a tweak on something, you know what that is, but it's kind of similar, but it's indifferent. Sauvignon is something that has this real kind of sense of place, doesn't it?
I think that's true to an extent, Jamie, but I would also add that, table stakes are, you've got to have a cool climate. We can't produce this kind of wine from the interior valleys of California or in Australia, in the warmest areas of Australia. They can't do what they're doing, across the way in New Zealand. They might be able to do it on the cooler coastal areas in Australia. But so the cool climate is table stakes, but the hand of the winemaker really does play an enormous role in Sauvignon Blanc. And it's and it really, hats off to the Kiwis, if you like that style, for identifying this kind of anaerobic process and specific yeast strains that are known to kind of crank up that grapefruit, passion fruit aroma. It's one of the most interesting winemaking exercises is to decide how much oxygen you're going to introduce over the to the juice and to the young wine, and also how potent of a thiolic strain, because you got to remember these. When we say thiols and we talk about passion fruit and grapefruit, you're really dealing with sulfur compounds or amino acids that contain sulfur. So I don't know, have you ever heard of a durian it's kind of it's one of these where it takes papaya and it has this really musky character, and it can kind of get a little exotic and kind of get into a musky character. And so we are flirting with this very interesting set of aroma compounds when we produce Sauvignon Blanc. So I would say that the hand of the winemaker it really does have an enormous influence, as well as the growing region.
Fantastic. So we've talked about the couple of growing regions we're looking at today. I've got a little video. So if you make sure that I've got myself and Steve pinned. So if you're on gallery view, you'll see everyone. If you go to speaker view, you should see the two of us. And I'm just going to pop on a little video. There's no sound in it, so Steve can kind of talk through what we're looking at as we go through. But just an overview of where we are and what these vineyards look like as we go through the wines.
Yeah, the easiest definition of the Central Coast really is that region between San Francisco and Los Angeles, but along the coast. So those coastal counties, for the most part, include Santa Barbara to the south, San Luis Obispo County, where Paso Robles is located, where it's a warmer climate, and then Monterey County that rubs up to the Monterey Bay. And the first four wines in our set today are from the Arroyo Seco in Monterey. Again, this cool area. If you watch golf on television, you've probably seen the famous Pebble Beach golf course in the cold ocean waves crashing against the rocks there. You'll see redwood trees growing right on the ocean front, and our vineyards are just one valley removed from that coastal shore of the Big Sur and Carmel area. It's a a relatively high rainfall area. It's an area that parts of which are known as the salad bowl of the United States, where everything from artichokes to asparagus to leaf lettuces, and it's a very, very fertile ground, and quite appropriate for Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, these cool climate varieties. And of course, our rather unique offering that we'll have in the third wine in the flight today, which is our wildflower Valdiguier, does quite well in that cool climate.
So there's a quick question in the chat as we're going through cool climate. And how is climate change affecting the wines that require cool climate? What are you doing in the vineyard, in the winery, to combat the ever increasing temperatures?
Right. So UC Davis, University of California, Davis is the kind of premier wine school in California. I'm a graduate. There was Professor Winkler came up with a scale of Roman numerals 1 through 5, going from cold to hot, and he had this concept of growing degree days, and that's where you take the average daily temperature above 10 degrees Celsius during the growing season, so starting from April 1st going to the end of October, and you do a little tally. The first 4 wines are growing in an area where it's region 1 and 2, so they're going to be almost the last to feel the effects of climate change. And the way the climate works around here is, of course, we're on the west coast of America. As you have high temperatures in the inland areas, that air rises and it sucks the cold air off the Pacific Ocean and gets it moving, from west to east, predominantly. And so you kind of create this sucking sound. You create this vacuum as it gets hotter in the interior. You actually create a stronger draft of cold air over the coastal regions. So unusually or counterintuitively, we're actually seeing some quite colder and windier climate in this particular county. I will say Paso Robles is an area where on the Central Coast and much of California is based on irrigated farmland, and the evaporative demand is going up because it's warmer and drier and hotter. And so we're relying more and more on groundwater, and that some of those groundwater basins that are becoming of interest almost as governmental jurisdictions, where they're looking for leaders in the business community, including our founder J Lohr, to respond and implement conservation plans, and we play a very active role in that. I don't know if it made it onto your packages, but nearly every wine in our lineup has this California sustainable seal on the back label, and that demonstrates our commitment to not only the environmental concerns, but some of the social equity business practices that we think are important to our customers.
So yeah, and some fantastic tasting notes. People seem to be really enjoying it. Couple of things, very tropical for a Sauvignon Blanc, which it is that different kind of style. People like less cappy notes, which is always a good thing. I've never thought how that's a positive thing for tasting notes. We've got some apple in there, and people are it's exciting to hear about that sustainability is a consideration, and I think that's really important when we're doing anything with the land. We've got to look at sustainability, because if we don't, it's not going to be here for much longer. So the fact there is that sustainability aspect is hugely, hugely important.
Just a follow up, that cat pee terminology, that's kind of what I'm talking about, where it is kind of this slippery slope for a winemaker that is chasing that new world style, that it can be overdone for sure, and we're very cautious not to end up in that category. And I will say, just, on the climate change thing as well, you might think that everything's going to ripen earlier, like, instead of the crop developing in 7 or 8 months of a growing season, that growing season is going to shorten down to 5 or 6 months. But it actually is quite divergent depending on the region and the variety. Some varieties will ripen earlier, which is kind of the logical thing because it's hotter and therefore everything's spinning a little faster. But in some cases, the hotter it gets, it kind of retards enzyme functionality and kind of life processes and photosynthetic processes. And we're actually finding some varieties that are actually ripening later than they had historically. But
I think with that climate change thing, we are finding, there are things ripening earlier, but we're pushing this. There's more extremes in winemaking now, that it's either later or earlier, and going from there. So should we move on to the second wine and pop onto the
right? Yeah.
Onto the Arroyo Monterey Chardonnay.
That's right. So we're moving from sort of an aromatic, crisp white in that flume crossing Sauvignon Blanc from J Lohr to now our, I'll just say California style Chardonnay. If I said this was made in a Burgundian style, some people think, oh yeah, I know what that means. But when they're pressed to define what that means, I don't really know what that means. Does that mean you add yeast? Or and then I'll say, well, what if I said Chablis style? Well, most people would kind of go, okay, Chablis style. That means, no oak, probably a concrete tank, probably a larger vessel, higher acid, maybe less malolactic character. So kind of working backwards and working conversely, when we talk about J Lohr's winemaking style that we'll describe sometimes as Burgundian, it means fermenting in barriques in 228-liter barrels filled about 3/4 full with grape juice. It means certainly yeast, but it also means a high fraction of malolactic fermentation, which is, for those who may not know, the yeast convert the sugar in the grape juice to alcohol, but this malolactic bacteria will take the malic acid, which, if you think of malic acid, think of green apples. It's the acid. The malic is what you find in green apples, so that real tart, bright acid, and converts it to lactic acid. So, of course, what comes into mind when you talk about lactic acid is dairy and milk and soft and creamy. And so our style involves that. This wine, even at its price point, which again I'm not really schooled, particularly in your market where the price point is, but it's very unusual to find a wine at this price category, I mean an affordable price category, that is entirely barrel fermented. We have a crew that's stirring the barrels 3 weeks out of every month. They go in and pop the bung off every barrel, put a little wand down inside, give it a good firm stir to stir up all the yeast and off the bottom of that barrel to kind of help build body and weight into the wine through this yeast autolysis process. And anyway, then bring that wine into our bottling tank by the end of summer, previous to the next harvest. So I think you're going to find, Jamie, I'm more comfortable talking about winemaking than I am about wine. So what do you think about the flavor profile?
So I think it's really interesting, and there's a great comment on here that says would normally be skeptical about Chardonnay, but gosh, this is nice. And I think we've gone through a stage in the UK with Chardonnay early mid-90s, and there was a bit of a backlash against American Chardonnay and Australian Chardonnay because there were a lot of people adding a lot of oak, and not always good oak, and probably where it didn't need to be. So we have this almost skepticism, and there's some people that use big oak that do an absolutely phenomenal job with it. When oak is used right, you can use lots of oak and get it correct, and that's absolutely perfect. But there was a lot of people using a lot of oak for cheap and cheerful wines. Correct me if I'm wrong. a oaked wine that's done well shouldn't be cheap because oak is expensive. So therefore, if you've got a oaked wine at $5, you're not using the right type of oak, and you've not got the right oak. You're using oak to hide things. And there's been a lot of people run around and go, and as you mentioned, there's been a lot of people go, oh, we're trying to make a more Burgundian, leaner, fresher kind of style. And I think we're seeing more of that. But it really sits in that old world, new world question. And I've said it a few times for anyone who's seen us previously, that I think this old world, new world thing is going to disappear in the next 10 years. It's going to be very much about knowing the winemaker, knowing the vineyard, and knowing the style as to what you're going to get. You used to be like, if it's really fruity, it's new world. If it's really earthy and tastes like dirt, it's old world. And it was a very easy distinction 15, 20 years ago. But now as the world's changing and techniques are changing and people are looking at the style of wine they want to create, we're finding a lot more overlaps. But I think this is a beautifully subtle style of Chardonnay. It's got great fruit, it's got elegance, and it sits in that really kind of nice category where you can sit and you can just have a glass, but it's got so much about it that it would go really well with food, with a cheese board, with a, this for me is Sunday roast chicken dinner kind of world. So it works really, really well. And it is a bit lighter and fresher than what you would generally, and when I say anything is, we make these blanket statements about wine. This is generally a little bit more elegant than what you'd find coming out of your general Napa Valley or standard California Chardonnay. But you've got that mallow, you've got that creaminess, you've got that richness. That it's not crying out that it's a steely Chris Chablis. Absolutely not. It's its own style. No. But it's a very nice halfway house, that kind of in between, the best of both worlds almost.
Well, yeah, thank you. Yeah, and compared to other regions in California, I haven't talked about one phenomenon. I guess I did a little bit, which is this idea as you have high temperatures in the inland areas, you create this draft of cold air across the coastal valley, and nowhere is that more true than where this Chardonnay is grown in the Monterey Arroyo Seco, where we have 20, 25 mile an hour winds for 6 or 8 hours per day. So you pull your car off of the highway and stop at the gas station to fill up your petrol tank. If you park your car in the wrong direction, you might when you open your door up, you might just never see that door again. It might whip open and hit the car next to you because the wind blows so strong through that valley. What that translates to from the viticulture point of view is that the vines kind of go to rest and hibernate for those 6 or 8 hours a day while the wind is blowing. Temperatures are quite nice in the 20 Celsius typically would be a temperature, but there's no photosynthesis going on during the windiest parts of the day. And so when Sonoma is just about finished harvesting Chardonnay, that's when Monterey starts harvesting Chardonnay. So we have a little more hang time. And in general, it translates into a transition from maybe notes of green apple and pear to a little riper stone fruit, nectarine, white peach, and those kind of flavors. If we leave the grapes on the vine too long, we'll start to get apricot characters, which is certainly not desirable. But it is interesting that our sugar development and acid decline is actually later than other parts of California that have actually the same temperature ranges as the Monterey Arroyo Seco, but again, they don't have the wind that kind of hit, is like effectively pushing the pause button on the photosynthesis each day. So
absolutely. And do you find having that wind then, do you have less issue with disease than other areas of California because you've got that wind coming through, so you don't get moisture and rot and things like that? Does that help the vineyards?
Yeah, it is true. So we pull leaves on one side of the vine, the upwind side of the vine, and so there's typically a fog layer every morning. So when you go out in the vineyard, there's dew on the grape canopy and on the fruit. So the fruit is wet. So the disease pressure mildew is quite high. But before noon, just before noon, is when that wind starts to kick up each day, and it really blows that off and does help suppress that disease pressure. So the other thing, Jamie, that's interesting, you talked about over oak Chardonnay. You and some members of your audience might find it interesting that this idea where we're filling the barrels with juice and actually doing the yeast fermentation in the barrel, the wine actually ends up less oaky when you do that than if we fermented it in a tank and then put the finished wine in the oak barrel. It has to do with we extract some of these flavored compounds out of the oak, and the yeast actually metabolize those into odorless compounds that maybe contribute more to the weight and viscosity of the wine, but don't have that overt, I don't know, like almost like tequila, brown tequila aroma that you get
really,
if you take finished wine and place it in an oak barrel. It is a anyway, it's a very well demonstrated phenomenon. So when a winemaker selects, what kind of oak, this wine is done with a blend of American and Hungarian oak. Gosh, what do we buy? 5 shipping containers of Hungarian oak to do this. So close to 750 Hungarian oak barrels each year to support this wine program. Whether you're choosing French, Hungarian, American oak, in our case, it's barrels. In some wineries, their price point, they're using alternatives to that, little cubes and chips and things that they would submerge in a stainless steel tank. The timing is just as important as the type of oak that you introduce.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's a great example of what Chardonnay could be. So I think we're probably time for wine number 3. And this is, from all my years in wine, this was the first wine that I ever had from J Lohr. And this was when I was back. So this is going to be 12, 15 years ago, was the, because I ran a little wine bar and we did 60 odd wines by the glass in these. Right, if you've just joined, can you pop yourself on mute, please? Because we've got some a bit of feedback coming through. I'm sure I can do it for you. So this was the very first wine that I ever tasted from J Lohr, and I thought it was cool, it was funky, it was interesting, it was light, it was fresh, it was Pinot-esque, but not being Pinot. And you'll obviously tell a little bit more about it, because I've heard different things that it's the same as Gamay, it's related to Gamay, it's similar to Gamay, and it's nothing at all like Gamay. So let's go on to this, because I love this wine. I think it's going to be a bit of a Marmite wine. I think this is something that people are either going to absolutely love or go, it's not really for me because it's such an interesting style. But you should just buy it for the bottle. The new packaging is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, we've had our graphics people really had a heyday with that wine. The confusion with Gamay was no accident. It was legally planted as Gamay in 1972 on our ranches. That was what the nursery told us they were selling us. That's what we thought we were growing and producing as wine until a French ampelographer came to California in the 1990s and was walking through and said, hey, wait a minute, that's not Gamay, that's Valdiguier. Is how you pronounce the variety correctly. And through some of these global trade agreements and whatnot, we were kind of our use of the term Gamay on our wine label was discontinued, and we now claim the rightful and correct name of this variety, which is Valdiguier. So we weren't the first to get kind of the switcheroo when we called the nursery in France and tell them to send some cuttings over on the boat, and what you receive is not what you had ordered. But this is a large berried variety. maybe the reason you were introduced to this wine so early, Jamie, is thanks to our friend Jancis Robinson, who has really celebrated this wine for decades and been our chief proponent of this wine, to the point where I'm like, oh, Jancis, we also make Cabernet and Chardonnay. We try to remind her, because you can imagine that this is a pretty limited audience, but it actually is a variety that's kind of re-emerging as this kind of hipster variety. We're seeing it new plantings in here on the Central Coast, Santa Barbara County. Our neighbors to the north up in Oregon, there's a number of producers. I get phone calls pretty regularly from young winemakers in Oregon, telling me that they're dipping their toe into this variety, and they want to learn from our experience, both in the vineyard and in the winery, and how we've handled it. We do. This is a very late ripening variety, at least in the cool climate where we grow it. It is always the very last item we harvest. So after we've harvested all the Sauvignon Blanc, we've harvested all the Pinot Noir, all the Chardonnay, the Riesling, then the Valdiguier is the last to ripen, and it's relatively low sugar still at that point. So the alcohol of the wine tends to be, 12.5%, high acid. We'll do about a quarter to a third of the wine as that carbonic maceration. So it really pushes that, what we call the amylic character. So that kind of candied, artificial fruit, bright raspberry, cranberry notes. And then we'll do the other balance of the wine in a traditional way, where we remove the stems, crush the berry, and ferment as a traditional red wine. Non-malolactic, no oak, so it's very fresh, and almost like a rosé on steroids in a way, in terms of the winemaking style.
Yeah, I love how powerful this is, with the alcohol being as low as it is. There's great fruit, there's great punch to it. It's not big, and it's not like powerful, like big tannic over the, it's it's very approachable, but there's a lot of oomph about it. There's a lot going on, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, we get a lot of, chef owner restaurateurs that, where they're really looking for a very specific wine to go with a very specific, maybe they have a wine pairing menu or something like that. Where, for me, maybe some of my best experiences are just with a, what do we call it, a charcuterie plate. So you've got, maybe some Parma ham, some dried cheese. Even the cornichon comes off quite well. Like, whose wine can stand up to the acid of a small pickle, right? But the little I don't know, the cured sweet peppers and things like that. It really is a unique. And of course, we just had our American Thanksgiving, and that is the high water point of Valdiguier consumption in the United States, is of course at the Thanksgiving Day table here in the U.S.
So there's a couple of people mentioned in the chat about serving this slightly chilled, which I completely agree with. I think this just, not cold, but just a little bit of a chill on it that you could do with, similar to a Beaujolais or Pinot Noir. I think, it's got enough fruit in there, it's got enough acidity that a little bit of chill in the sunshine in the garden. I shouldn't be saying in the sunshine in the garden at this time of year, but you know what I mean. But yeah, what do you think? A little bit of a chill on this, or serve it at room temperature? What would be the choice?
Yeah, room temperature, you're going to miss a lot of the enjoyment. It definitely should be chilled. I think, in reality, no, we don't have a lot of control over our temperature at my house. So it's either in the refrigerator or it's in the cellar. So this is a wine that I would leave in the refrigerator, but when I serve it, I would just leave the bottle on the table and allow it to warm up in the glass, and then allow the bottle to warm up on the table. And maybe if it's set out for half an hour, maybe it goes back in the fridge for a short, to kind of maintain that cooler temperature.
To bring it back down again.
Yeah, bring it back.
It's one of those wines that, I've got, there's ice buckets, and it's one of those things that I would serve on the ice rather than in the ice. If it was just laying on the top of the ice bucket.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and Yeah, well, champagne and sparkling, is submerged in the ice. I would say, Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, oftentimes whether it's in or on, that's kind of a finer point, but you want to keep those cold throughout the service. Again, this is one where it could, kind of just a little above that. And I would almost say the same for the Chardonnay, the Riverstone Chardonnay that we just tasted. Again, serve it cold, but allow it to come to room temperature during the time of the service.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, Finbar's put in there a classic 14, 15 degrees. I'm not going to try and translate that into, my wife's American and she lives in Fahrenheit, so I'm not going to try and translate it, but we're probably talking what, 30, 60-ish, 60 degrees.
Yeah.
Anywhere close.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to do some math too. 60,
yeah,
62
room temperature and Fahrenheit might be in the 70, 75.
Yeah.
The refrigerator is closer to 40.
Nice temperature. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Fantastic. So we've got obviously we've got 3 more wines to discuss, but we were going to do a little bit of a geology and geography 101 at some point. Where do you want to pop that in? Do you want to get the next wine in the glass and kind of talk about where you're sat and do the slideshow now, get wine number 4 into the glass, introduce it, and then talk through that?
Let's do that. So the next wine is the J Lohr Monterey County Pinot Noir. So we do have some outside growers in this program, so it's not entirely from our Arroyo Seco estate. So we have some partner growers on this particular wine. But yeah, if I can help, and you want to bring up that first slide, I kind of wanted to, well, first of all, it's been since 2007 since the last time I did a real wine, like a working visit to the UK. But it probably wouldn't surprise you. And how do I make that bigger? If I just click on it, will it enlarge, or right now it just looks like one of many.
So if you go to view and if you click,
up to view
and click speaker view,
speaker view, there we go.
You do that, and that should split. So
yeah.
Anyone who's not on speaker view, go to speaker view, because that will be my screen. I've disappeared, which is wonderful for everybody to do these slides. Right. And then Steve can talk through these slides as we go through. So if you can't see both, click speaker view and you should be good to go.
Yeah. Well, again, it's been quite some time, 2007, since I did make a working visit to the UK, work the market, meet with restaurateurs, retailers. I see Mr. Chamberlain. Hello, Mr. Chamberlain, on the line there, working in his retail shop. And it was just an eye opener for me, the level of wine knowledge that exists in the trade community, the wine trade community in your country. And so I thought if I could impart just one little unique, a couple of things, takeaways from California, obviously the adjacency to the Pacific Ocean. The map's hard to read. I don't really have a better resolution, but I will kind of tell you what we're looking at. So, and my points are pretty simple, which, this typical map of California, we have this, the red dot at the top. I know it's hard to read. It says the far north, that light blue or baby blue, dot says the inland valleys, and then orange is north coast, and then down on the mid left is that light green color. That's the central coast where we are today. So I'm going to kind of talk about 3 main areas: the orange being north coast, that light lime green being the central coast, and the light blue, or we'll call it Tiffany blue, being the inland valley. So Jamie, when we met a week ago to kind of brainstorm the theme for today's talk, he talked about, that the experience for a UK person with California wine can range from, say, Blossom Hill, or, very low cost, lower priced wines to, I don't know, Diamond Creek and Opus One and, $300 and higher type wines. and not a lot in the middle. And so what I wanted to point out here is that there's roughly 688,000 acres of vines in California. More than half of that is the Inland Valley. And again, these are not the coastal areas. These are the warmer areas, the areas where not only does it get hot during the day, say talk about 40 Celsius daytime temperatures, but it stays hot throughout the night. If you visit Sonoma or Napa or Paso Robles in the summer, there's a good chance that you might see those same daytime temperatures, but the difference is that those areas will, the difference is that those the nighttime temperatures will drop down to close to 10 or 15 Celsius at night. So more than half of the wine that's in the market is going to be from those inland valleys, and really not justifying the higher prices of the coastal regions, which by and large are going to say Sonoma, Napa, Monterey, and Santa Barbara on the label. Okay, so that's a good starting point for you as a somebody who's interested in trying some wine. If it says California and doesn't have a sub-appellation, chances are it's from the Inland Valley. I think I did see something in the chat, but I think people know that this fourth wine we're tasting is the J Lohr Falcon's Perch Pinot Noir from Monterey County. Can you go to the next slide, Jamie? So little geography lesson. This line I've drawn with my own finger is that's the limit of my digital prowess. That is the San Andreas Fault. Well, you've all heard about that. You know about earthquakes in San Francisco. This line literally runs right through San Francisco. It was the cause of the 1906 earthquake and all the loss associated with that. But what you may not know is that the San Andreas Fault is the border between the Pacific tectonic plate and the North American plate. So go to the next slide. This is quite significant because there's only 8 major tectonic plates in the world. So I mean, we're really talking about very fundamental difference between the Central Coast, which lies on the Pacific plate side of this San Andreas Fault, and Napa, Sonoma, and the Inland Valley part of California, which is the majority of wines in California. So if we could go to the next slide. And in addition, there's this concept of the Ring of Fire. I understand that Mauna Loa is going crazy in Hawaii. It hasn't erupted since 1984. That is right in the center there. But there's all those red dots are all volcanoes. But the Central Coast, you can see it's very interesting for just to me intellectually that there's I don't know if that's a 400 or 500 mile gap between that volcano down in Mexico to the ones up in Northern California. And so our growing region is in that little unique area where, again, the Pacific plate is above water, and it's about the only landmass that's on the Pacific plate that isn't underwater in the Pacific Ocean. So if we go to the next slide, and next and final slide. So when you think of California, if you're a wine professional and you're kind of trying to, put together the various attributes of California wine, you might be this might help you kind of, put your break down our state a little bit in your mind. And again, I didn't really get into the soil types, but you can imagine that the Napa Sonoma, there's a lot of volcanic derived soils there. None of that exists on the Central Coast. We are what you would call an uplifted seabed. So in Paso Robles and Monterey, you're going to find what we call calcareous soils, similar to the Rhone Valley, where it's a high lime content type soil. and that ends the slideshow.
Is there going to be a test at the end?
Yeah, it's just an attribute of the Central Coast that I find really interesting, and it's not really discussed or talked about much in the wine education community.
Just to say very quickly, there was a few people who said that the map wasn't the easiest to read. If you would like that, if you just want to send me a private message in the chat with your email, I will share that PowerPoint presentation with you, so you have that information going forward. Because I think it's really interesting. We talk about soils and aspects and all these kind of things, but to see how there's this one line that is, one of 8 plates, well, 2 of 8 plates coming together that make this absolute difference, I think is eye-opening. And it's not something we talk about very much about wine, because there's not many wine regions that are on the boundaries of these plates, and to have that one in California, I think is really, really cool. So if you want to send me a message in the chat or give me a shout at any point, I will get those slides over to you to use for staff training, or for yourself, or to share with everybody that you want to share with, because I think it's really interesting. So we've got the Pinot Noir in the glass. So
yeah, so you kind of had some interesting terms for fun and friendly. This is not our reserve or single vineyard Pinot Noir. This is from a collection of our own ranches and outside growers, meant to reach kind of a approachable price point. What we typically, the varietal characters, there's typically a little strawberry, but there's usually some earth, or what I call sagebrush character to the wines. When we talk about red wine phenolics, this is a low tannin, low color variety. So it really shouldn't be astringent on the palate. There is a little bite to it though, and that is because we're very intentional about a certain percentage of stem inclusion, so that we get a little herbal bite from those stems that we include in the primary fermentation on this wine. Our approach is roughly 20% of the fruit has stems in the primary ferment, and 80% will actually remove the stems before we ferment. The majority of it's done in these open top tanks, which allow us to do that plunging process during the ferment, rather than pumping wine from the bottom of the tank to the top, which can bring out some kind of I don't know, we lose some of the fresh fruit character when we do that. And I don't know what else to say before that. It is a moderate alcohol, so it's about roughly, I don't know if we have to be within 0.5%. I think typically we're at, sometimes we'll label it at 13.9, but it might be 13.5 in the bottle. So at least for California standards, that's considered kind of a little lower or more moderate.
I think that's an interesting thing with alcohol, that I think it's all crept up a little bit without too many people realizing it. And you see 13.9 and go, oh, that's high, but it's really not anymore. We're not at the world of Pinot Noirs at 12% and light white wines at 8% anymore, unless you're in German Riesling. Everything's crept up 1% or 2% over the last 5 years, and I think a lot of people have not noticed it. Suddenly, 14% is high, and it's really not anymore.
I'm not any smarter than anybody else, but here's something that over the course of my career I've noticed, and you talked about it. The difference between old world and new world is diminishing every year. And at the beginning of my career, 20, 30 years ago, you would pick up a lot of French wines, and they always had that kind of barnyard character, which we've since learned is from a yeast called Brettanomyces.
Oh, but that's good. A little bit of Brett's good. Ask anyone in the south of France, they'll tell you a little bit's good.
Right. And I've sat through a lot of tastings. Like, let's say I'm that French guy and somebody says, excuse me, sir, does this wine have a little Brett to it? And he says, yes, this is part of the terroir. This is part of our culture and our tradition. And then as soon as the Zoom call's over, clink, you guys are out. What am I doing? I'm running down the hall, cursing out my cellar master and telling him to clean those darn tanks and sanitize the presses and the filters and all the rest of it. So I think over the course of my career, I've seen a lot of old world producers. I've never seen one say, yeah, we don't really like that about our own wine, but I have seen progress towards more freshness, lower occurrence of Brettanomyces, and also to your point, the alcohol levels, whether it's the weather or it's a wine, because their winemaking style, the alcohol levels have creeped up on old world wines, compared to the 1990s, let's say, or 1980s.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, without going completely off piste away from your wine, Steve, you look at it and people are comparing, what Chablis was 10 years ago is kind of what England is now. And, there is that,
okay.
there is that shift. But I think there's, old world sometimes have their hands a little bit tied because they've got their AOC laws, they've got their DOCG laws, whatever it is. In the new world in California, you can decide to plant a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of whatever to, work with, the changing times. Whereas in the old world, they're a little bit stuck with what they've got, unfortunately. Well, I say not unfortunately. Fortunately, they make some great wines. But as the world's changing, they're a little bit stuck by the laws, aren't they?
They are, but again, I think the proof is, through whatever means, I kind of agree with you that some of the old world wines have moved from kind of a center of 12 to 13 alcohol closer to a 13, 14 world. Yeah.
Which is for a lot of them, they used to be, part of the rules were they had to reach at least a certain percentage to be classified as that, and that's not difficult anymore. It's trying to stay below that is tough. But anyway, are we gonna move on to wine number 5?
Right. Yeah. Well, our hats off to is it Vineyard Brands that's our distributor there in the UK?
Vineyard Cellars.
Vineyard Cellars. Sorry, I knew I wasn't getting it quite right. Hi, Vineyard Cellars.
I think Joe's on the call as well. So Joe helped me set this up.
Hi, Joe. Hats off to you for bringing in Southridge Syrah. It really shows me that you guys did your homework and did your through tasting through J Lohr's portfolio to find this wine that is not honestly broadly distributed. It's in our what we call estates tier, our kind of approachable wine tier. But it is the rare find among our red wines in our portfolio.
Well, what can I say, Steve? Tasting the range was a complete terrible job to be given. Syrah is one would definitely need to order quite quickly. I think actually it's been going extremely well.
Yeah, but this is the wine that when I have an old friend from college that's coming through town and he's he wants to pick up a case of something and he doesn't want to go into our restaurant tier and our really elite wines, wants to kind of keep it in the more approachable price range. This wine is uniquely high quality within its price category. We've had some issues here in Paso Robles over the last decade or two, where the Paso Robles growing region within California kind of got pinned as the area for Rhone wines, and indeed I do agree that Paso Robles is perhaps the source of the best Rhone variety. So, Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre, in the state, within the state of California, but we obviously have, there's much more Cabernet planted, and that really is a highlight of Paso Robles that was somewhat being overlooked. And so this particular wine, I talked a little bit about phenolic structure. So dark in color, this Syrah is going to have really high color, but still relatively soft tannin. The Pinot Noir was low color, low tannin. This is high color, low tannin. And then when we get into our Cabernet, we're going to have that kind of high color, but a little more tannin, a little more astringency. So that's kind of, I spent a lot of time thinking about the textures of red wines, and that's kind of how I would describe this. So if you like the density of a dark red wine as it enters your mouth, that's usually where you kind of experience that dark color. And then it's the astringency is more that 10, 20, 30 seconds later, that palate impression. So I'd like, as you guys taste this wine and you taste the next wine, our Seven Oaks Cabernet Sauvignon, I'd like to see if you kind of agree with me in terms of my premise, in terms of how these wines play out in terms of the mouthfeel and the structure.
Absolutely. So, Steve, this is labelled as South Ridge. Is that a single vineyard, or is that a particular area that you've got multiple vineyards in? Where does this Syrah come from?
Well, it is a fanciful name, we would call it. So the name did derive from a ridge on our vineyard in this area called Templeton within Paso Robles. But it was never actually a single vineyard wine. It was the main component, but we were growing this variety at a variety of locations. As I said, we have close to 3,000 acres here in Paso Robles now, 25 different ranches of various sizes around the appellation. What I can tell you is we've moved our newer plantings of Syrah tend to be in the coolest areas within the Paso Robles range of climatic diversity. We tend to get more of that white pepper character from those vineyards. We'll also, I don't have the production notes on this particular vineyard in front of me, or this vintage in front of me, but we'll often include some white varieties, whether it's Roussanne, certainly Viognier. We'll do certain fraction of Viognier in the primary ferment. But it is a red wine that, if it's too aggressive and astringent, we'll actually look at blending the white Rhone varieties in to kind of make it just a little softer, longer on the palate.
So am I right in saying it as well? So once again, you can soften it with some whites, but blending in Viognier actually ends up having a deeper color. The Viognier, if you co-ferment, gives you a deeper color of Syrah, doesn't it? Which sounds
true, yeah.
counterintuitive that you add white wine, surely it should be lighter, but it makes the wine darker.
Yeah. In the simplest winemaking sense, I call it get married or die. So those pigment molecules are running around single monomer, and if they don't find a tannin friend to mate up with, and that's what stabilizes them, get married, and that's the color that's there. So what'll happen is, in that primary ferment, the Viognier, for some reason, those tannin molecules are quite attractive to the monomeric pigments coming from the Syrah, and so you end up with a greater amount of stable color in the wine, a year later. It's kind of what happens. And of course, we love that little aromatic lift that it also brings. It kind of provides some very compelling floral aromas to this red wine.
So we've got a very, very important question in the chat. Stephen Chamber wants to know, will this be on Steve's table for Christmas dinner?
Absolutely. Yeah. Syrah, I'm, our top selling wine, of course, is Cabernet Sauvignon, but I do have my soft spot for Syrah. And again, talking about a foodie wine, we're not going to be eating prime rib. That might move me. More beef dishes might move me more in the Cabernet Sauvignon direction. My wife's almost got me nearly to a vegetarian diet these days, and so I often find that Pinot Noir and Syrah are more compatible with that lighter fare.
I think so. So John's put a great note in the chat. Loves the Syrah, my type of flavor profile. It has more body more body without feeling that it's about to rip your throat out that sometimes you can get with the Barossa Shiraz. And I love Barossa Shiraz, but sometimes you get that alcohol jump. You end up at 15.5, 16%, and it gets you. It really does. This is what, 13.9. And it gives that. And I really, once again, I keep going back to Old World, New World. This sits in the best of both worlds. It's not big and over the top like sometimes you get a Barossa Shiraz. It's not overly earthy like a Chateauneuf de Pape or a Gigondas or something like that. And it sits so nicely in the middle. The world's a good place with this. It really is.
Yeah. Well, from a wine, I've been running the winemaking program or the red program for 15 years, and our overall program as director for 5 years now. And for the red wines, we talk about our
it's being recorded, so.
Oh, hello. We talk about our house style being dense but soft, and so that's really what we're celebrating here, is that high color, that richness as the wine enters your mouth, but that softness, which is kind of a little. So what we have some techniques in the winery we've learned how to tease out the darkest color of the wine while limiting the amount of astringency.
Best wine so far, people are saying. Well, two people are saying. And that's great. I think what's interesting so far, we've got one more to go anyway, but each wine is its own thing. And I think if we asked everyone when we get to the end, what's your favorite wine, 1 through 6, we get a massive mix and we get a vote for everything. And that's what's really kind of cool. There's the right wine for the right person at the right time. And so far, these wines have been absolutely epic so far, absolutely epic. And it showcases that there is more to California than Napa Valley and Sonoma. And there's some wonderful, wonderful places. And it is these little kind of bits that you can have some Sauvignon Blanc where it's a little bit cooler and the wind comes through, and where it's a little bit warmer, you can get some Syrah when it's a little bit this. And I think, you've got to look at the size of California. It's not a small place. And I think that's what's, sometimes we go into the old world and we dial it down into like a single vineyard, and then we go, oh, California, oh, Australia, oh, South Africa. And it all goes, that's one thing. Looking at the tiny little spots and the tiny little places that make great wine for the reason that that's planted there is what makes the new world the new world.
Mm-hmm.
So where are we at? Is it time to move on to a little Cabernet Sauvignon for I say the final wine of the night. It's the final wine of the tasting. People can do what they want to do afterwards, but final wine of the tasting?
Right. Well, so we've got the Seven Oaks Cabernet Sauvignon. Again, let's see, I have been eyeing the J Lohr wines on the Vineyards wine list, but we're only 10 minutes. Okay. So really, this is really our flagship wine at J Lohr, the Seven Oaks Cabernet Sauvignon. It is, again, a fanciful a name. It's not a single vineyard wine. It may shock you that we produce close to 1 million cases a year. So that'd be 12 million bottles of this wine per year. Produced and bottled, I should say. So again, if you look at that, rather arcane little production statement, it's distinguishing this wine from I guess what traditionally you would be known as a negociant wine. With many brands around the world, especially in California, the brands are strong, but if you really look at the production statements on the wines, they may or may not be from their own vineyards. They may or may not have been even fermented at their own winery. And particularly in this price range, you're not going to find wines that are aged in barrels. So similar, this is kind of the sibling wine to the Riverstone Chardonnay that was our second wine tonight. In a similar fashion, this Cabernet Sauvignon Seven Oaks is aged entirely on premise here for a full 12 months. Every drop goes to barrels. It's a traditional aging method that we've used since the inception of the product over 25 years ago. We use the Bordeaux model, if again, just kind of wine geek stuff, is to create the blend. So each year it's a little different, but there tends to be 3 to 5% Merlot in this blend, 3 to 5% Petit Verdot, 3 to 5% Petit Syrah in this blend each year. We marry that blend together before it gets aged. And then you may know the converse to the Bordeaux model is sort of the Rhone model, where each variety, when in Chateauneuf, you know, when they make their blend, they typically are aging the Mourvedre, you know, separately from the Syrah, separately from the Counois or whatever, and then cobbling those blends together just, you know, a month or two before bottling. But we found that marrying the varietal blend together in the month following harvest, before the wine goes to barrel for a year, really, you know, has been an important part of sort of our house style.
So, quick couple of questions for you, Steve. I'm going to have to scroll back up very quickly. Of the wines we've had tonight, any of them designed for aging? And if yes, how would they develop over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, you know, I would say the most age-worthy wine in this collection is the Cabernet Sauvignon, and it would, you know, it would do quite nicely, you know, out, you know, 8 to 10 years from vintage date. So we annually I'll taste back 20 vintages on wines that we produced that long ago, and so a wine in this tier could easily go 10 years. Even our top wines at about 20 years, they tend to, whether it was just the cork quality or whatever, you start to get spotty. And what's maybe important to remember is that it's not every bottle that'll go bad. It's like, you know, maybe, you know, after 10 years, it's 1 or 2 bottles out of 10 that would be kind of oxidized and caramelized at that point. And the other 10 will actually maybe be more delightful. But again, there was this risk of having that off bottle at the same time.
Absolutely. And then for a geeky question, do you follow the Bordeaux model with lots of racking and oxygen contact? Is that how you? So when you're making wine, is there lots of racking? Is there lots of oxygen contact like Bordeaux, or do you try and keep the oxygen away?
It's kind of a hybrid of that. We're crazy high oxygen levels through on the juice and during the fermentation. So when it's grapes and grape juice, we're crazy high. And in the first, say, 30 days of the wine, we are intentionally bringing oxygen to the wine. But once our blend is made, we actually have, I think most of the most knowledgeable producers have gotten away from that, you know, monthly or quarterly racking of the barrels through the aging process. So for where early in my career, where we you know, you would might see 5 rackings on a wine that aged a year to year and a half. These days, the number's closer to 2 or 3 to keep freshness. But again, we've kind of amped it up earlier in the aging process.
Okay, and I've not got the answer here, so I'm passing over to you, Steve. Joanna has asked, does more oxygen mean less sulfur?
That's a good question. Well, not directly. Let me think about that. That oxygen is really you know, I talked about the get married or die. So these, you know, monomeric color compounds having to find a friend, a tannin well, the glue between that is facilitated through oxygen. So we're actually doing all that before we've even added any sulfur dioxide or, you know, sulfites to the wine. That's all happening before that initial addition of sulfur to the wine is present. It's a little advanced for me to say yes or no. I wouldn't want to
No, absolutely. And there's so many
Yeah.
things with the winemaking. It depends on what you're looking at doing. It depends how you do this. It depends where it goes from. But I've just put in the chat, what was the favorite? There's people going, I can't pick a favorite. They're all great. People like, I picked one, but I love them all. We got 3, 1, 6, 5, 2, 4 in the thing. So it's really, really exciting that everybody seems to love everyone. So wherever you've joined us from tonight, you should have a price list in your box, and get back to your local wine merchant, your local thing, because if we don't keep buying these wines, if we get excited, we're not going to see them anymore. So make sure, I hope you had a good night. Steve's come in to chat to us. It's been a lot of fun. Valdegui was the best, absolute favorite. Unexpected favorites. It's really good across the board. Everybody seems to love everything. So that's a winner, isn't it?
Yeah, it's nice not to have a dud.
And it is. I think that's the thing, is each their own occasion. There's going to be some wines that you want to just sit and drink in the sunshine, some wines that will go great with Christmas dinner, some wines that you'll want to sit down for a couple of years and drink on a special occasion, but all really, really good. You may well have seen, I didn't mention it, we talked about sustainability earlier. The little QR code in the corner of my screen, if you scan that will take you to the J Lohr website, which will talk all about their sustainability programs, all that kind of stuff that is going on. If there is anything that you want from me, if there's any questions we haven't answered, chuck me an email, jamie@onlinetasting.co, and I can send your questions over to Steve. We can get it back to you. I will share the maps and all that kind of thing, because the more we taste, the more we learn, the more exciting people get about wine. So everyone seems to be thanking us now, so I don't think there's any more final questions. But Steve, an absolute pleasure. Is there anything you want to share to sign off with?
No, my best to you. Please, root for Club USA. I'll be rooting for England.
It was very difficult last week.
Yeah.
But no, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time, Steve. Thank you very much, Joe, if you're still in the chat, for setting this up with everybody. And you know where to get the wine from. Get drinking, enjoy, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thanks very much.
Many thanks,
Bye,
Jamie.
all.
That was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you, Joe.
Take care. Thanks, Steve. Bye.
Take care.